Today we're going to read The Wind and the Willows, originally by Kenneth, Grahame, but this is an Usborne Young Readers adapted version to be a bit shorter. Illustrations are by Mauro Evengelista. Chapter 1. On the River. Mole had been cleaning all morning and he had had enough. "Bother!" he cried at last, flinging down his brush and heading for his tunnel to the outside world. He scratched and he scrabbled and he scraped with his paws until, pop, he was out in the sun. "This beats spring cleaning," Mole cried, dancing around a hedge. As he wandered along, he came across a river. Mole had never in his life seen a river before. It chuckled and gurgled, rippling with glints and gleams and sparkles. Mole was bewitched. He was gazing at the river when a small brown creature appeared on the opposite bank. Then it winked. It was the water rat. Mole and Rat looked at each other for a moment. "Hello, Mole." "Hello, Rat." "Would you like to come over?" called Rat. "It's all very well to talk," grumbled Mole, "but I can't swim." Rat stepped into a small boat and rowed across to the Mole. "Jump in," he said with a grin. Mole took Rat's paw and carefully climbed aboard. He smiled in astonishment. "I've never been in a boat before." "What?" cried Rat. "Never? What have you been doing then?" "Is it as nice as all that?" asked Mole shyly. "Nice," said the Rat. "There's simply nothing better." He drifted off into a dream and crunch! The boat struck the bank. "Oops," Rat said, laughing, and pulled away down the river. Mole sat back, trailing a paw in the water and enjoying the gentle sway of the boat. "What's over there?" he asked, sitting up and pointing to some trees in the distance. "Oh, that's the Wild Wood," said Rat. "My friend Badger lives there, but I don't visit. It's too dangerous with all the weasels, stoats and foxes." Before Rat could say any more, Mole spotted a stream of bubbles and Otter's wet brown head popped up. "Everyone's on the river today," he gasped. "I've just seen Mr. Toad in his new boat. New outfit, new gear, new everything. Can't stop." And with a splash, Otter was gone. Rat frowned. "Typical," he said. "Toad's a great fellow, but he always wants something new. Then, as soon as he has it, he's bored." They stayed on the river until the sun sank in the sky. Mole watched Rat pulling the oars and decided he wanted to row. Excited, he jumped up and snatched the oars. Then he plunged them into the water, slipped, flew into the air, and landed, oof, on Rat. In a panic, Mole grabbed at the side of the boat. Sploosh! The boat went over and he was in the river, a very cold, wet river. Coughing and spluttering, Mole was going under when a firm paw reached out to haul him to safety. "Oh, Ratty," he sobbed, a soggy lump of misery. "I'm so sorry." Rat smiled. "Don't think any more about it. But how would you like to stay with me for a while? I could teach you how to swim and row." Mole was so pleased he could only nod as they squelched home. Chapter 2. The Open Road. One bright summer morning, Rat was writing a poem about ducks when Mole appeared. "Ratty," he said, "can we visit Mr. Toad?" "Of course," cried Rat, jumping up. "We'll row there at once. It's never the wrong time to visit Toad." Mole gasped as he saw Toad Hall, a grand house with a lawn that went right down to the river. Toad was in his garden studying a map. "Hooray!" he said as Rat and Mole strolled up. "You're just in time for a trip in my new caravan." "I thought you had a new boat," said Rat. "Oh, pooh," said Toad rudely. "Boats are boring. Wait until you see my wonderful caravan." There was no doubt it had everything they might need for a few days away, and all so cleverly stored. Soon they were on the open road. Even Rat, who missed his river, enjoyed the ambling along the narrow lanes. He and Mole were walking beside the caravan, talking of this and that, when pop, 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 a car swept past, throwing up a cloud of dust and knocking the caravan over. Rat jumped up and down in fury, waving his fist at the car. "You villains!" he shouted. "Scoundrels!" Toad didn't say anything but poop, poop. Mole went to calm the horse and check the caravan. "It's ruined," he said sadly. "Oh, Toad." "Who cares about that horrible little cart?" scoffed Toad. "A car is the only way to travel." And he talked of nothing else all the way back to Toad Hall. Chapter 3. The Wild Wood. After their ruined caravan trip, Mole and Rat stayed quietly by the river. Many of Rat's friends looked in for a chat, but never Badger. Leaves fell and chill winds blew. Rat stayed inside, snoozing by the fire. Soon, one cold afternoon, Mole slipped out by himself to visit Badger. He felt quite cheerful as he entered the wild wood until dusk fell. The wood, already dark, grew darker. Strange shadows danced about him. Then a whistling began, faint, shrill, and all around. In a panic, Mole began to run, bumping into things and falling over. Shaking with fear, he hid in the hollow of an oak tree, lost, worn out, and very, very scared. Meanwhile, Rat had woken up. "Moley!" he called, but there was no answer. Then he saw Mole's coat and boots were gone and went outside. There in the mud were Mole's tracks, leading straight into the wild wood. Horrified, Rat grabbed a stick and set off, calling for his friend the whole time. "Moley, where are you? It's me, Rat." At last he heard a little cry. "Ratty, is that really you?" Mole whimpered from his hiding place. "It really is," said Rat. "Come on, we must go home." But it had started to snow. Flakes whirled around them, covering the trees and hiding the path. Rat shivered. "We may have to stay here after all." They were looking for shelter when Mole fell over a door scraper. "Ow, ow, ow, ow! Hooray!" To Mole's surprise, Rat laughed and began to dig in the snow. "I don't see why you're so happy," grumbled Mole. "I've just scraped my shin." "Don't you see?" panted the Rat. "You've found the entrance to Badger's burrow." And Mole had. "Badger!" yelled Rat, banging on the door. "It's Rat and my friend Mole lost in the snow." "Ratty," said Badger when he opened the door at last. "What are you doing out here? Come in and get yourselves warm." He led them to a snug kitchen, found them dry clothes and made supper. Over steaming cocoa and oatcakes they began to talk. "Tell me all the news," said Badger. "How's Toad?" Ratty frowned. "Going from bad to worse. He had another car crash last week. He's been taken to the hospital 3 times, added Mole, and paid out a fortune in fines. "He's a hopelessly bad driver," finished Rat with a yawn. "If he carries on like this, he'll be killed." "In the spring we shall take him in hand," said Badger firmly. "But now it's time for bed." The next morning, after a big breakfast to keep out the cold and then lunch to keep up their strength, Badger waved them off. "That's enough adventure for me for a while," thought Mole as they headed home. Chapter 4. Talking to Toad. Early next spring, Badger arrived one morning just as Mole and Rat were finishing breakfast. "It's time to take Toad in hand," Badger declared. "We must go to Toad Hall at once." Up at Toad Hall, a shiny red car sat on the drive. Toad was at the front door, adjusting his driving goggles. "Hello," he called cheerfully. "You're just in time for a jolly... He paused as he saw his friends' stern faces. "Inside," ordered Badger. "We're going to your study for a talk." "Talking won't work," muttered Rat. Almost an hour later, Badger and Toad came out of the study. "Toad is very sorry for all this foolishness with cars," said Badger. "Aren't you, Toad?" "No," Toad said, "not sorry at all. In fact, the very next car I see, boop, boop, I'm off. I shall go." "Then we shall hide your keys and lock you in your bedroom until you see sense," said Badger. "We'll take turns keeping watch." Rat was on duty when Toad asked for a doctor and a lawyer. "Oh, Ratty, I feel so... oh," Toad moaned faintly. Rat was alarmed. Toad must be really ill, he thought, racing from the door and locking the door behind him. "I'd better get help." Toad laughed as he watched Rat scurry from Toad Hall. Swiftly, he knotted bed sheets together, climbed out of his bedroom window and slid onto the ground. "I'm just too clever for Ratty," Toad thought as he briskly walked away. "There's no match for me." Feeling very pleased with himself, he went on until he reached an inn. Outside was the most magnificent car Toad had ever seen. "There's no harm in just looking at it," he said to himself, and then, "I wonder if it starts easily." As if in a dream, Toad started the engine. As if in a dream, he climbed into the driver's seat, and, as if in a dream, he drove off at top speed. Chapter 5, Toad's Adventures. The very next day, he was in court. "Toad," said the judge fiercely, "you stole a valuable car. You drove it very badly and you were rude to a policeman. I am sending you to prison for 20 years. "This is the end of everything," Toad sobbed, as he sat in a lonely dungeon. "Oh, wise Rat and Badger and clever Rat and sensible Mole and stupid, stupid Toad." Toad was too miserable to eat. The jailer's daughter noticed him, and it made her sad to see him so thin and unhappy. "Cheer up, Toad," she said. "See what I've brought you." And she handed him a plate piled high with hot buttered toast. Toad dried his eyes, nibbled at the toast, and began to feel better. The jailer's daughter started to visit regularly. As the days went by, she grew to like him. "Toad," she began on one visit, "my aunt is a washerwoman." "Never mind," said Toad. "Do be quiet," she said. "My aunt does the prisoners' washing, and I think she can help you escape." That night, a small, stout figure hurried from the prison in a dress and a shawl of a washerwoman hidden behind a pile of washing. "Good night, ma'am," said a prison guard. Toad chuckled to himself. "Night," he squeaked in reply. Toad stumbled through fields, over ditches and under hedges until he was too tired to go on. With a huge yawn, and pulling the shawl tight around him, he collapsed by a tree and slept. When Toad woke up the next morning, he wondered where he was. Then, with a leap of his heart, he remembered. He was free! Yippee! He stood up, stretched, and marched on into the morning sun. Before long, he reached a canal. A solitary horse was plodding along the towpath, pulling a yellow barge with a smiling bargewoman. "A fine morning!" Toad barely heard her friendly greeting. "Is anything wrong?" she asked. "Well, ma'am," he replied, "I need to get to Toad Hall and do the, washing, and—" "This is a bit of luck," the woman interrupted. "I'm going that way now, and I have a pile of washing to be done." "You are?" said Toad. "Pile of washing?" he added doubtfully. "Climb on," she said. "I'll give you a lift, and you can do my washing on the way." Toad stepped aboard with a grin. "I am so clever," he thought. "Washing's in the cabin," said the bargewoman. Toad shrugged. "How hard could washing be?" he muttered. After half an hour of fighting with the clothes, Toad was hot and drenched, but the clothes were as dirty as ever. The bargewoman laughed. "You're not a washerwoman at all." "How dare you laugh at me?" Toad roared. "I'll have you know I'm a very distinguished toad." The barge woman screamed. "A slimy toad on my barge? Never!" And, grabbing him by the arm and leg, she flung him overboard. Toad went flying through the air and landed with a loud splash in the canal. Gasping for breath, he struggled to the bank, fighting his dress all the way. "It's all over," he wailed. "I shall be caught again." "What's wrong?" asked a voice. Toad looked up to see a familiar face, a small brown face with whiskers. "Ratty," he said. "Toad," said Rat, "is that you? Whatever happened?" "I've had such trials," boasted Toad. "Thrown into prison, then escaped. Come to Toad Hall and I'll tell you the whole amazing tale." "Oh, Toad, we can't," said Rat. "The wild wooders have taken it over." Chapter 6. A Surprise Attack. A shocked Toad followed Rat home. "Now don't worry," said Rat once Toad had dried off. "Badger has a plan to recapture Toad Hall." Just then Mole and Badger came in. "Ratty, we attack tonight," said Mole. "They're having a party and Badger knows a secret tunnel that leads right into Toad Hall and—" He stopped as he saw Toad. "Toad, you're home! Whatever happened?" "It's quite a story," Toad began. "No time for that now," said Badger. "We must prepare." That night, armed with sticks and swords, the four of them crept into the secret tunnel. They groped and shuffled along until at last Badger stopped. "We ought to be under the hall now." As they paused, they heard a murmur of shouting, cheering, and stomping from above. The tunnel sloped up and they came through a trapdoor into the kitchen. Such a noise was coming from the main hall that there was little danger that they'd be overheard. "Now, boys!" shouted Badger, and they ran into the hall. Squealing and screeching filled the air as terrified weasels dived through windows and startled stoats shot under the table. Badger, Mole and Rat dashed around, bopping anyone who got in their way. As for Toad, he went straight for the chief weasel and sent him flying. In 5 minutes, it was all over. "Well done, everyone," said Badger. "I think we should have a party of our own to celebrate." "Dear friends," Toad said over a jolly supper, "thank you all for your help. I wouldn't have my home back without you." And from that night, Toad was a changed animal. Instead of being boastful or reckless, he was content to live a quiet life by the river with his 3 best friends.